Hello everyone, I'm the Minute Kirby, and welcome to my channel, The Commander Tavern. The Commander Tavern is a channel dedicated to my favorite Magic Gathering format. The Brewery is a series on this channel showcasing my spicy brews under the deck text. On this episode of The Brewery, I'll be discussing my take on two commanders with Friends Forever from the Stranger Things Secret Lair, 11 the Mage, and Chief Jim Hopper. If you like this deck or any of the cards I'll be mentioning throughout the video, please consider using my TCG Player affiliate link when purchasing those cards. You can find that link down in the description. It'll really help out the channel. The best way you can help support the channel is with my Patreon. For just $1, patrons get early access to certain videos on YouTube. In fact, patrons got a chance to see this video earlier. You can also support my channel for free by simply liking, subscribing, and sharing, which also helps out a lot. You can join my Discord server for free if you want to join the Commander Tavern community. All pertinent links are down in the description. Alright, let's get back to the episode. 11 is a 3/5 human wizard for 1 generic, 1 blue, 1 black, and 1 red. She gives you a maximum hand size of 11, which is okay, but at least it fits with her triggered ability. Whenever she attacks, you draw a card and lose 1 life. Then, if you have 11 or more cards in your hand, you can cast an instant or sorcery spell for free. This ability is very strong. Even though it requires a lot of setup, its only downside is needing at least 11 cards in your hand to do so. In this sense, she's similar to Narset and Lighten Master. However, Narset's downside is exiling only the top 4 cards of your library and only free casting 1 instant or sorcery for free from there, and they both need to attack. But 11 has at least 11 cards to choose from, so you could potentially have more options to you. Even then, if that weren't enough, while 11 is powerful on her own, having Friends Forever means that she can be partnered with another legendary creature with Friends Forever. In this case, I partnered her with Chief Jim Hopper. Not only is this partnering super flavorful, since they're essentially father-daughter, if you've seen the show you'd get it, but he also gives 11 access to white. But Hopper's no slouch. He's a 4/4 human soldier with menace for 2 generic, 1 red, and 1 white. He then creates a clue token for each non-token creature that attacks with him. This provides amazing synergy for 11, since you can crack clues to fill your hand to make sure you have at least 11 cards to trigger her. My goal with this product was to not only partner together 2 legends that work super well together, but are flavorful as well. That's why in the previous episode of The Brewery, I partnered Mike and Will. Not only do they synergize amazingly well as partners, but they're best friends in the show too. So it's a flavor win as well as a mechanical win, just like this father-daughter pair. Now, as you could tell from the thumbnail, this is going to be a very obnoxious deck. Your opponent's salt will be enough to put the Dead Sea to shame. Be warned when piloting this deck or brewing something similar. That being said, if your meta is up for it and don't care about what you run, then go for it. I built 11 and Hopper to not only take as many extra turns as possible, but also as many extra combat steps as possible, since they both have an ability that triggers when attacking. So let's get the major offenders out of the way. Alrund's Epiphany, Karn's Temporal Sundering, Part the Water Veil, Temporal Mastery, Temporal Trespass, Nexus of Fate, Beacon of Tomorrows, Time Warp, Capture of Jingzhou, Temporal Manipulation, Time Stretch, and Walk the Eons are the deck's extra turn spells. Now, the first 5 exile themselves upon resolution, which I guess is WotC's way of making extra turn spells quote-unquote more fair and less degenerate. The middle 2 shuffle themselves back in afterwards, which is a bit more fair as well. But the last 5 is where it's at. These extra turn spells don't get shuffled back in, nor get exiled upon resolving. In fact, Walk the Eons has the potential of being used again if you pay its buyback cost. Not being exiled nor shuffled is going to matter a bit further in the video. Now, I know that Capture of Jingzhou is ridiculously expensive as of the recording of this video. However, before Temporal Manipulation was reprinted in Ultimate Masters, it was only available in Portal 2 and a Judge promo, same as was currently Capture of Jingzhou. If it gets reprinted in a Master set, its price is going to tank as well. But with the amount of extra turn spells in the deck, you don't really need it. But if you did have it, then the probability of having at least one of them in our hand when we have 11 cards is approximately 38%, which are decent odds. And then we'll cast it for free off of 11's trigger, which will happen even if she dies in combat. Expropriate and Plead for Power are 2 more potential extra turn spells, albeit situational. No one besides us is going to vote for time, so this will give us 3 cards for 4 mana, which is great at keeping our hand count at 11 or more. The same is going to happen with Expropriate, and then we could just expropriate the best permanent from each player for free if we cast it off of 11's trigger. Mnemonic Deluge, Archaeomancer, and Tamiyo the Moonsage are the reason why we care that 5 of the 12 extra turn spells go to the graveyard after resolving. Cheating Mnemonic Deluge off of 11's trigger when there's an extra turn spell in your graveyard is beyond glorious. Bonus points for thrice copying Time Stretch from your graveyard. That's 6 consecutive extra turns. Even the arts reflecting the salt being extracted from your opponent's eyes, even from their 3rd eye. Archaeomancer might seem like another one-time only deal, but the deck can reuse Archaeomancer, which we'll see in a moment. Or their effects can also be used on one of the many extra combat spells in the deck, which we'll soon see. Tamio is absolutely ridiculous in this deck. Not only can she be used to freeze down a potential blocker, but her -2 ability can help us draw cards, which is great for 11. However, even more epic than that is her emblem. If we're able to get her emblem, then those extra turn spells that don't get exiled or shuffled back in will go to our hand instead, thus giving us infinite turns. Or if we didn't have such an extra turn spell yet, we can get infinite combat steps with one of those spells and thus eventually find it with 11. Those being Savage Beating, Fury of the Horde, Relentless Assault, Waves of Aggression, World at War, and the Resurgence half of Respawn and Resurgence. While these don't outright give us an extra turn, most of the creatures in the deck, and more importantly both commanders, have attack triggers, so even if we can't get an extra turn off of 11, we can at least get an extra combat phase and try again, especially since Hopper is going to get us even more clues to keep digging through our library to try and find more extra turn or extra combat phase spells. Combat Celebrant, Hellkite Charger, Morag Fury of Akum, and Port Razor also provide extra combat steps as part of their combat tricks. Combat Celebrant needs to be exerted to give the extra combat step, which is fine, because if we draw into an extra combat step spell, it'll untap and then can be exerted again for even more extra combat. So the amount of extra combat steps we can potentially get out of it is very high. Unfortunately, we can only get up to 3 extra combat steps with Port Razor, but that's still good enough for a single turn, assuming it connects on each opponent. The Dragon's extra combat phase triggers on attack, but you have to pay a whopping 7 mana for it, which is fine since we're not using our mana when cheating those beefy spells anyways. But we'll see how to make the most of Hellkite Charger in a bit. Morag is perhaps the easiest one to trigger since it's via landfall. The deck's able to run all 10 fetch lands, so if we manage to get one, we'll get 2 extra combat steps for 0 effort. If that weren't enough, our attackers get +1/+0 for each time they've attacked. This includes the first time they're attacking too. Aggravated Assault is similar to Hellkite Charger, but being on an enchantment makes it harder to get rid of. At least it's cheaper to activate, and you can activate it at any time you can cast a sorcery, so it doesn't have to be during combat. As I mentioned earlier, the deck has plenty of combat tricks to take advantage of all the extra turns and extra combat phases, especially since our commanders both have attack triggers. Sword of Feast and Famine and Sword of Hearth and Home are perhaps the best one in the deck, since they synergize with some of the cards I've already mentioned. If a creature equipped with Sword of Feast and Famine connects, then we can untap all of our lands afterwards. If equipped to something like Hellkite Charger, not only does it get +2/+2 and protection from green and black, making it even harder to block, but the lands you tapped to pay for its ability to get an extra combat will untap to then do it all over again. Same with Aggravated Assault. Now, Sword of Hearth and Home also gives +2/+2 and protection from 2 colors, making the equipped creature harder to block. While this can help us thin the deck of basic lands, it can ramp as well as flicker a creature, and the creature we want to blink most is Archaeomancer. If we manage to have an extra turn spell in our graveyard and an opponent we can constantly smack with Sword of Hearth and Home, then we get infinite turns. Audacious Thief, Dream Trawler, and Library Larcenist are some more creatures with attack triggers that we want attacking as often as possible, since they draw us a card whenever they attack. Since these trigger on attack, it doesn't matter if they connect or not. As a bonus, the Sphinx has lifelink and gets temporarily bigger the more cards we draw. Ace of the Lawbringer also triggers when attacking, but we have to pay. It's essentially a Sphinx's Revelation on a body, which is nothing to scoff at. Good thing Hopper gives 11 access to white. If that weren't enough, whenever he enters the battlefield, each opponent can't cast instants or sorceries during their next turn, so he's yet another target to blink with Sword of Hearth and Home. However, we can't just assume no one will have blockers on the board. For that, the deck has Dolmen Gate, Iroha's God of Victory, Loyal Unicorn, and Runetail Kitsune Ascendant. Well, in order to have the same effect as these other cards, Runetail has to flip into its essence. But more often than not, it'll flip the moment it hits the battlefield, since Commander games start at 40 life. What these abilities do is permit us to swing into opposing boards with total disregard, since our attackers won't receive damage. Even if opponents block our creatures, most abilities trigger on the attack, not on combat damage, so it's not going to matter. Then if we have multiple combat steps, we'll either end up killing off their blockers or dealing a bunch of combat damage each turn. As a bonus, the Unicorn gives our creatures vigilance if we control either of our commanders, which is just icing on the cake. Emeria's Call can also let us attack with total abandon, since our non-angel creatures get indestructible until end of turn. However, this spell is used best when cheated with 11. Since it's free cast during the attacker step, our creatures will get indestructible before opponents can even choose blockers. Even better than that is its backside is a land that could potentially enter the battlefield untapped, so it doesn't take up a slot in the deck. However, thanks to Xuan Xuan, Lord of Wu, we don't have to worry about blockers at all, since he makes all of our creatures essentially unblockable. I love the horsemanship keyword, and it's a shame that there hasn't been any new cards with it since Portal 3 Kingdoms. If Xuan Xuan is out of your price range, then Archetype of Imagination is a good enough substitute. Just keep in mind that it won't prevent creatures with reach from blocking your army of flyers. Another way to deal with blockers is to just get rid of them altogether. Ruinous Ultimatum, Ingarrick's Wake, and Plague Wind are amazing spells to free cast off of 11's trigger. And just as with Ameria's Call, since we're casting these during our attack step, our opponents will lose all of their blockers before they can even assign them, since their creatures will have been destroyed before the blocker step even occurs. The Ultimatum's even better since it destroys all of their non-land permanents, not just their creatures. Or, with Insurrection, you could just steal them instead. Unfortunately, you won't be able to assign the stolen creatures as attackers if you do, but if you're able to get an additional combat step that turn, you can then use them to swing in and start ending the game much faster. Also, one reason I prefer 11 over Narset is that I get to keep my counter spells in my hand and don't have them exiled away from the top of my library. Worse than whiffing with Narset is losing any responses you might have. In this case, while the deck is only running Pact of Negation, Swan Song, and Mana Drain, we get to keep these in our hand since 11 is free casting spells from our hand and not from exile out of the top 4 cards of our library. But again, the preference between 11 and Narset is up to the player. However, extra turn spells, extra combat spells, and lopsided board wipes aren't the only epic spells we can free cast thanks to 11's attack trigger. Peer into the Abyss, Seagate Restoration, and Valakut Awakening have the potential of drawing us into a ton of cards. Well, at least the insane card draw with Peer into the Abyss is guaranteed since we're drawing half of our library for free. We do lose half of our life, but that's fine if we draw into our win cons or can keep chaining into more extra turn spells and or extra combat spells until we do. Now, while the other two are still very good, with Seagate Restoration giving us an unlimited hand size for the rest of the game as a bonus, the fact that their backside is lands means that they don't take up a slot on the deck. So while these spells are good anyways, the fact that they're potentially free to cast and to include in the deck is just icing on the cake. However, draw spells don't have to be so epic to be good here. Gush, a humble card draw spell in comparison, can very easily help us get to 11 cards. We drop down to 1 fewer card in hand to cast it, but we can cast it for free by bouncing 2 islands to our hand, plus drawing 2 cards, at instant speed no less. So we gain 3 net cards in our hand at instant speed for free. Triskaidekaphile also gives us an unlimited hand size, but we can also use it as a mana sink to draw even into more cards. However, more than that, it's a potential win con. The deck is drawing into a ton of cards, and either way we want no less than 11 cards in our hand. Add to that the fact that Hopper has us investigating a ton of times each attack step, getting exactly 13 cards in our hand where our next upkeep is very viable. However, another viable win con while we're digging through our library is Approach of the Second Sun. We can free cast this off of 11, but then we can draw into our deck deep enough to potentially draw into it by our next trigger. Then we win the game when we cast it again, all potentially for 0 mana. Good thing 11 has access to white. The deck draws so many cards that Thought Vessel and Reliquary Tower for when we go over 11. Sure, Triskaidekaphile, Seagate Restoration, and Tamiyo's Emblem also give us an unlimited hand size, but these cards don't really take up a slot on the deck. The deck is mono green, so it needs mana rocks for mana acceleration. In fact, it's running as many as it can, with Arcane Signet, Azoria Signet, Boros Signet, Dimir Signet, Izzet Signet, Orzhov Signet, Rakdos Signet, Felwar Stone, Soul Ring, Mana Crypt, Mox Opal, and Max Amber. These are pretty self-explanatory. The mana rocks compose 13% of the deck since we need cheap ways to generate mana in order to recast our commanders due to the deck being very aggressive. So they're great where in the beginning, middle, or end of the game. However, Academy Manufactor, one of my favorite Magic cards in recent times, shines with almost any combination of partners with Friends Forever, since almost all of them investigate. With Hopper's trigger alone, the amount of clues we can get is staggering. If we're attacking multiple times in a turn, the more clues we'll get. And the more clues we get, the more food and treasures we get. The treasures, more importantly, since they can be cracked to crack clues or to cast even more spells from our hand to not run out of steam. Even the food is useful since we could potentially lose a lot of life in this deck from opposing attacks as well as 11's triggers. The rest of the deck is just the rest of the lands. The deck's running all 10 fetch lands, all 6 dual lands, all 6 shock lands, Rogran Triumph, Savai Triumph, Command Tower, and Reflecting Pool, as well as one of each basic land. As with all of my deck techs, you do not have to run the more expensive mana sources like the dual lands, Mana Crypt, Legal Moxes, etc. if you don't already have them, won't proxy them, or aren't playing online. You can very easily swap them out for budget substitutes and the deck will still work just fine. This brew is just an idea of how to build around 11 and Hopper. As I mentioned at the beginning of the video, this deck is very obnoxious. Plenty of players hate extra turn spells and decks that cheat casting costs, so they'll hate decks that cheat extra turn spells even more. However, since there are only 12 extra turn spells it can run, it tries to maximize how many we can get to with the extra combat spells, which in turn help further fuel our strategy with the other attack triggers in the deck. Even then, 11 can also free cast some pretty steep costed spells that can also help achieve victory or set opponents back, so the deck is quite nefarious. These partners also complement each other well, just like Mike and Will do, so it's also a flavor win. However, 11 is such a versatile commander that you don't really need to run her as an extra turns commander. You can build her however you want. But if you're interested in the deck list of this spicy brew of mine, you can find a link to it down in the description. I would like to thank all my patrons for supporting me, and a quick shout out to all my higher tier patrons, the brewers, for their patronage. I'd also like to thank anyone using my TCG Player affiliate link, that also helps out the channel. And to everyone, thanks for watching this episode of The Brewery on the Commander Tavern. I am the Commander Kirby, and happy brewing.